Hello and welcome to the fourth episode of the Business of Possibility podcast with Ulster University Business School. I'm Wendy Austin, and in this series we're diving deep into the world of business in Northern Ireland, looking at how businesses are staying afloat in the current climate. During a global pandemic, we see that businesses are still innovating and demonstrating their entrepreneurial spirit, in some cases even more than usual. In this episode, Women in Leadership, we'll hear from a host of inspiring and really influential women business leaders in Northern Ireland's business sector. On the podcast, we have Professor Karise Hutchinson, Ulster University Provost Coleraine, Professor of Leadership at Ulster University Business School. Hi, Karise.
Hi, Wendy.
We have Roseann Kelly, who's CEO at Women in Business Northern Ireland. Hi, Roseann.
Hi, Wendy.
Kirsty McManus is National Director of the Institute of Directors Northern Ireland. Hi, Kirsty.
Hi, Wendy.
And Anne McGregor is Chief Executive of the Northern Ireland Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Hi, Anne.
Hi, Wendy. Lovely to be here.
And it's great to have you all on the programme, I must say. Now, together, we are going to examine and explore the dynamics of managing an organisation while responding to the business needs in what could only be described as a changeable marketplace. I'll also be asking how these inspiring leaders have risen to the COVID-19 challenge and about the importance as well of diversity in the Northern Ireland business sector. Firstly, though, it would be really great to hear a bit about each of you, about your background, your business, and how you came to be where you are today. Karise, perhaps we could start with you. Give us the brief bio.
Thanks, Wendy. Well, as you said earlier, I'm Provost of the Coleraine campus, which most people say, what on earth is that? Essentially what I do is I'm an ambassador for the Coleraine campus, working collectively with my colleagues in Belfast and also in Magee, working on serving the university's regional mission, making a difference in our students and in terms of the local area. Essentially, I'm also a professor of leadership, so I'm still a big part of the business school, teaching and researching in the area of small business and entrepreneurial leadership.
Great stuff. Anne, what about you?
Hi again, Wendy. How I got where I am was probably pushed by my family to be educated. But like everyone else, when I was younger, I didn't quite know what I wanted to do, but I went to Queen's and studied economic history and politics. Then I joined a junior management development program, which got me into a career in the private sector. I worked in big companies in England, actually, Roche Manufacturing and Birds General Foods. When I come back to Northern Ireland, I went into economic development, working in the enterprise sector. I was using my transferable skills at that point. And then I set up business in the community in Derry, and I became the first chief executive of Enterprise Northern Ireland. And now I'm at the Chamber. I suppose if I was trying to look back, with hindsight, I could see that each role had progression. Each phase taught me something. And there was a common theme, and it was all about people and how they helped you on the way. And I was thinking, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who died last week, when I was watching some of her interviews, and they were talking about how what her parents taught her was to work hard, but they also taught her about decency and how to treat people and how to work with people because they're important. So that's what I've applied to my career. That's the common theme.
Very good one too. Kirsty, what about you?
Yeah, probably different from Anne. I was probably the least likely to succeed in our family, but at the age of 16, something changed. I woke up one morning and actually switched the brain on. Did IT at Queen's, and then after I graduated, had a year out in the US and decided to spend 8 years of my life living in California during the dot-com boom and the dot-com bust. Decided I always wanted to come back to Northern Ireland before I turned 30. Came back, did my MBA at UU, and kind of had this, fell into kind of membership organizations given my time in America. So got a job working for CBI, and then now I have been working with IOD now here for National Director for 3 years. So a varied career, but a surprise to my family, I have to say, a big surprise.
But, a good surprise though, those ones are always useful, aren't they?
Yes, absolutely.
And Roseann, what about you? Tell us a bit of your story.
Born in Dublin, moved to Armagh, Went to university in Coleraine. It was the new University of Ulster when I joined, and I was one of the first to graduate out of the University of Ulster. I studied history, and from there I went to a marketing assistance role in a window company, but it was actually just dealing with complaints for leaks and sending the man in the van to sort them out. And then I got involved in, it was the IDB export marketing program at that time, and went over to Toronto for 6 months with that. And when I come back, I stayed with the marketing team and went into Belmont Photographic Services. So that's telling my age when people put film in cameras. I was there for about 9 years in the senior management team with the focus on marketing. And then took a career break and joined a WebWise Women program, which was run by Parity at the time. And from that then started up my own business and then got involved with women in business. And I suppose, as they say, the rest is kind of history. I was a voluntary committee member and then a director, and then they asked me to step into this CEO role for 3 days or for 2 days a week for 3 months. And that's maybe 9 years ago. So I suppose for me, the passion took over, and it's something that I'm very passionate about. And it's really about the diversity piece. Our mission statement doesn't actually mention women in it. It's about creating a new economy, one built on inclusive growth. So it really is that piece that I'm very passionate about, that we utilise the potential of women in our economy and society.
It's interesting hearing each of your stories because given the last 6 months, that was almost then, and here we are now, if I could put it like that. I mean, the pandemic has been such a disruptor, and each of you has had the unique task, not just of managing a business or function yourselves, but also supporting a network of businesses, if I could put it like that. Anne, how have you led your organisation in these circumstances? But what type of leadership approach have you brought to it?
Well, first of all, as someone that works with so many businesses, like everyone, we're a business too. So how do you sit back and think about what does that mean for us and how can we plan out of it? And we obviously had to adapt and change like everyone else. So, I'm sure my colleagues will say we all went online. We looked at our services that we could deliver that weren't involving events. We're known for having 1,000 people network in St. George's Market to sell to each other. And we're known for, having Louis Theroux at the waterfront with a lot of people at it. But we looked at it, going online, looked at everything we could do. But I was thinking, how do we do that? And I was trying, my approach is probably, I'm a whale, not a shark, if you're looking at leadership styles. And sharks are solitary and they're self-focused and they work in a vacuum and they don't plan as much and they give you a surprise attack. Whereas whales work in stable units, good groups, and they practice teamwork, they develop the people, or they look after each other. And I think key to me was because of that approach and because of Northern Ireland Chamber's commitment to people development through investors and people, we were able to just build on what we were already doing. And we had a fantastic team. And they adapted, they were innovative, flexible. They were also empowered to do what they had to do, and I think that's how we survived. And we were already doing wellbeing programs, but we enhanced them because people had to work differently. So we didn't cut back in staff support. We invested more in staff support, and that thing. When you're on the up, you have to develop yourself. When you're a leader, you have to develop and support others. And I think that stood us in good stead because we're investing in an SMT and we're using the IOD and using other organisations. And we've just kept doing that. And if anything, now we're closer to our customer because our staff realised that it's all about the customer and all our practices were right all along, basically.
Oh, that's good to hear, isn't it? Kirsty, I don't know whether you're a whale or a shark, but tell us how you've supported your network and kept your business going during this.
Yeah, and it's such someone, I reflect, because it just seems like, this March seems to be like a year or 2 years ago. But I mean, we have 1,000 members, and at the start, the first few months was very much like a 999 operator. You did get that sense. The calls were just relentlessly coming in, and really it was my team behind me that allowed me that time to focus on servicing our members, so that they did all the work that I'd normally do so that I can respond to them. But it was intense. I mean, it really was. And, it wasn't 95 anymore. It was 99, and the calls were coming through and varied. And, you were dealing with desperate people in desperate situations, whether it was they'd been turned down for a CBILS loan, or, there were issues around the kind of structures of the support program. But I think for me, it was about collaboration. And one of the things that I'm very proud of, the Business Alliance, which is the Chamber, IOD and CBI and Centre for Competitiveness, formed the Business Alliance Cobra Group. And I think we were one of the first organisations to talk about this short-term working scheme that existed in Germany. We fed that up nationally through our national organisations. And then from that, then you've seen the furlough scheme. So I think that collaboration was really, really key. But one thing that we've also done as the IOD is supporting our executive and non-executive directors. And for us, we felt the businesses that were going to succeed through the pandemic were the ones that had that strong non-executive director team behind them, because those NEDs had the additional brain power and capacity to navigate through this crisis where the executive team were firefighting and just didn't have the time to think. So we did a lot of support with our NEDs on a weekly basis and going, here's the state of the nation. This is what you need to know to help your executive directors through this. And we continue to do that, and we continue to say that the businesses who will get through this. But I think one of the strong things has been innovation. And as Anne said, a lot of what we've done, events were physical, our professional development was physical. They're now online. It's, you have to translate it to an online world. It isn't face-to-face. And obviously we want to get back to face-to-face, but it's also brought different dynamics. We're doing training courses where you've got people across the globe in your course, from Belfast to Bermuda to Brazil. So that's exposed and opened the world. But I think that the remote working has been fantastic, and thankfully we had Microsoft Teams in place before COVID, which really helped. But I think that, for us, I'm very privileged. I get to see great leaders every day in our membership, so they give me a benchmark in which I need to succeed at the same level. So, lots of role models, which I think is so important in business.
Roseann, what about you? I mean, I know you say that it's diversity that women in business is driving towards, but when you see the statistics and the stories that have been coming out through the pandemic, the evidence of how women have been so disproportionately affected by what has happened, has that perhaps presented particular challenges for your members, or particular challenges for you and your people to deal with?
I think in terms of the members and our membership, it's very, very diverse. So you're talking about a very broad, so we have 4,500 members ranging from the public sector right through senior management to third sector and sole traders. But I suppose the ones that were immediately impacted would have been our female entrepreneurs who really were hit badly with this. And I mean, a key thing the whole way through has been the childcare. And, the issue has always been there around women double jobbing anyway. But when this came along and there was no school and no childcare, it had a double whammy impact on women. I mean, there's been so many women who are still working full time at home with children there. And there's Dr. Etta at Queen's University had done a survey as well around the impact that was having on women and in terms of burnout. So yes, they have been severely impacted by this. And in terms of the sectors also that have been impacted, retail, hospitality, that's where women are. But even as I recently got the McKinsey Lean In report, which is Women in the Workplace, and this is their 2020 report. And it's very scary in that they're talking about that 1 in 4 women in the workplace are talking about leaving the workplace, or downsizing their roles. So women in leadership positions are thinking of shifting away, and it's whether it's because they've had time to be at home and contemplate things, but that this is a key issue for companies that they really need to have a look at it, because we could be rewinding the clock on all of the gains that we have made very quickly as a result of this. But for women in business and my team, which is a small team, when it hit, we obviously all headed home, and some of them have children, some of them don't, and they were dealing with those issues. But for me, I think the key thing in terms of leadership, I actually found that the communication was better, because normally I would have been in and out of the office, flying around events, going to different networking things, and probably wouldn't have had as much engagement with the team. So there's been an improvement there. But I think key to leadership at this moment in time is in terms of that trust currency and flexibility with your staff. And you really have got to endorse that, make sure that they understand that there's complete trust and there's complete flexibility with your team, and again, communicate what we're doing. We also, same as Anna and Kirsty, pivoted online with our events, and really very quickly we had a very diverse range of activities for our members, but well-being was right in there. A bit of fun also with conversations, with Pamela Ballantyne and conversation with quizzes, and then we had the business webinars. But certainly, even as we go forward, I think women will be hardest hit in this, and it's very important that we all ensure that is not the case, because we will go back in terms of the diversity that we have achieved if we don't make a concerted effort. So we have a Voices in Leadership conference coming up, which hopefully it's international speakers, and they will be able to speak a bit more to what's needed.
Well, that'll be interesting to hear indeed. Karise, your situation, I suppose, has perhaps been a particularly interesting one, in that just recently the students have come back, which has changed the whole dynamic in some ways. Up to that, they weren't there. There was the whole business about exams. I mean, it must have been a nightmare for universities, actually, when I think about all of that. I mean, how have you managed all of that and your team at the same time?
I think the challenge for us, we've almost 25,000 students and about 1,600 staff. So it is a big oil tanker when you talk about pivoting. That speed and that agility that is actually required. I mean, we pulled together a recovery resilience group, and part of that, my leadership around that was around how we welcome and how we register and how do we actually induct our new students. And that's been incredibly challenging in terms of we had to completely shift to online, and there's been different debates on what element or how much can you have on campus. There's the issues of fees, there's the issues of accommodation, there's all of those big questions. And close to my heart, given I've got one boy in St Andrews, Scotland, and one right now in Belfast. So, real issues. And I think the challenge in all of this that we found is you need to be leading the tactical response. So there's just elements of work that have to get done. And we find for us, I mean, it was, we were radically changing how we connect with students. I mean, it was very radical for us, and our whole welcome experience, if you think Freshers Fair, you think of all of those aspects that are so critical to that student's welcome experience, can't happen. And how do you provide that, and how do you connect? And then for our staff, how do we connect with each other? As provost, my working life was meet and greet, go to events like many of these ladies here. That was the bread and butter, whether it was 9 o'clock in the morning or 9 o'clock at night, sometimes Saturday, sometimes Sunday. So that was, I have to say personally for me, the greatest challenge of just reverting from that physical contact and the presence that you, how you engage with people, and then doing that online. And a big part of what we've done around women has been our women's network. And I would say it's not a network, it's become a not an underground movement, but an online movement where we have actually seen women and men come together, and the grade is no longer relevant. So the job title's not really relevant. People just need the connection. They need to be able to share. And that's that emotional part, which I believe is really equally as important as the tactical work that has to be done on the ground.
I like the sound of your underground movement now. That sounds like a good one. Let's just stay with you for a minute, Karise, because you've all been talking about leadership. Obviously, I've been asking you about it, but what do you think the pandemic has shown us in terms of leadership and the lessons we can learn from this? Because in all of the podcasts that we have done so far in this series, A Business of Possibility, it's been very clear that leadership has had to learn a lot of lessons itself during the pandemic in terms of, Roseann mentioned, trust and flexibility and so on. And also those of us who perhaps are not leaders, but who look to our leaders for leadership and guidance, have had to be much more flexible and trusting as well. Could you just talk to us a bit about that for a moment?
One of the things that I think we all would agree that we know the why of leadership. We know it's critical. I talk about the leadership lid. I mean, the ability to grow, the capacity of an organization is limited by its leader. But for me, this pandemic has really shone a light on what leadership really is. In fact, what I believe it always was. And that is leadership is actually a lot more human, a lot more accessible than we think. So traditionally, if you look at, I'll not give you the theoretical conceptual lessons on leadership, but what I will tell you, there's a lot of them. There's a lot of theories. There's a lot of different debates. It's a bit of a hot topic, but we talk about leadership. We think title, we think position, we think power, we think budget, we think big teams, but actually leadership is about influence. And the one thing this pandemic has shown us that young and old, regardless of who you are, what you're doing, have stepped up. They've stepped out to lead. We've seen that on our streets. We've seen it. Captain Tom, you remember he captivated us on media. So, it was almost that didn't matter who you were, people were actually intentionally influencing around us. And I think that this is actually one of the most interesting parts of leadership, is that this pandemic has actually shone a light on how we should practice it. And it's what Roseann is saying is the how. We can talk about it, we can look at it, but how do we actually practice it? And the research that I've done with small businesses and a lot of the reading I've done is I talk about leadership as a muscle. So we all have it. It's our choice and how we exercise it. And that is the difference between great leadership and actually poor leadership, very weak and mediocre. And we're at the stage now in this pandemic that we know it's more human, it's more accessible, but how do we practice that? How do we practice diversity to make sure that is up front and centre? How do we create opportunities for CEOs and flexible working? In a university, in terms of our senior leaders, how do we create new stereotypes? I'm fed up with the old stereotypes of the superwoman outfit. I can tell you as a working mum of 4 kids and this panel here today that, the time for the superwoman, the superman is over. And what we want something that's relatable and real. And most of all will actually make a real difference.
It's interesting you say that it shone a light on those leadership qualities. Without getting political, I'm just tempted to ask to what degree you think it has shone a light on poor leadership as well, and shown where that gets people when they don't quite know where they're going.
I think it's the old adage of words match deed. So whether you're a political or an economic leader or community, if you have your manifesto and you can talk, and most people will write speeches for these people, but actually I believe that leadership's about the whole person. And a lot of my early interest in leadership was really around my discontentment and my disappointment of leadership in the public square, if I'm being honest with you. And it's been a challenge to me as I've stepped up and grown as a leader myself. And, so we're interested in people's ethical viewpoints. we're interested, do they actually really want diversity in their team? And actually, what do people do in their spare time? How do people give back? All of those aspects of leadership. So, when it comes to the public square, we can, and our leaders can say one thing, but we're actually really interested. And if you take COVID, for example, I know my responsibility in terms of, I'm the ones that watches what our students do in our community. Just glad I'm not in Belfast. My poor colleague has that responsibility. But when it comes to that, I have a huge responsibility in how I adhere to the COVID guidelines. I have to, when I'm thinking of just popping in to see my mom or to see friends, hang on a wee. So it's the whole person. And we've seen that, we'll not talk about Scotland and different aspects of people just openly actually not practicing what they preach.
Yeah. You've mentioned there several times diversity and the degree to which people do or don't really want to have that. It's an enormously important issue, obviously, here in Northern Ireland, and particularly perhaps for the Northern Ireland business sector. What does it look like currently, I wonder, and what more can be done to attract, especially given what we've been hearing from Roseann and the statistics around at the moment, what more can be done to attract and then retain women into senior business roles? Kirsty, what's your view on that?
Yeah, we all know about the diversity dividend, and it's proven, that I would like to see the conversation around diversity broaden, because I think we need to talk about race. I have members who really, I don't think you really understand what it's like to be black and be in business in Northern Ireland. And we can arrogantly say that we do, but until we hear their voices, we don't really know. We can't really validate that. Also, I think LGBT and disability, and also age, I think, and cognitive diversity as well. I think we need to look at the full spectrum of diversity. I think it goes back to the principles. You need to see role models, you need to look up and see somebody that reflects you. But it's also from a leadership perspective, I know many of our leaders are trying to grapple with this. How do they make their organisation more diverse, and how do they break down some of the organisational bias that exists, and even acknowledging that, whether it's an application form. And I know organisations like Deloitte, some of those personal information is removed from the application form to make it a more open and transparent. But I think, mechanisms like reverse mentoring is really, really important. So some of our board members who would mentor maybe somebody, who's younger, to really understand what it's like to be a young person in Northern Ireland at the moment, and get a view into their world, to really understand institutionally what more they can do. Because I think the more diverse an organisation, the more economically they will perform very well, with that diversity beside it. So I think for me, it's just, we need to see more role models, and but also we need to acknowledge as well, a lot of us, probably don't want to talk about it, but we do have imposter syndrome, and I think we need to be open and honest about that. I have that all the time, and I would speak about it very openly. There's times I'm asked to do something and I think, oh my God, this is like asking Legally Blonde to do something, but I really have to push myself and say, I'm going to do this. And I know that my male colleagues will not feel the same, and they'll be like, why are you doubting yourself? Just do it. But that is just something, and I think the more we're honest about that kind of uncomfortable part of our life, that we have that imposter syndrome. But, I think the more younger people can see that, they'll relate to that authenticity of, we don't have it all carved out, even though we may look it, we're actually swans, so.
Anne, what about you?
Sorry. I think employers have come a long way in Northern Ireland. I'm going to say the stock answer first. So I do think employers have come a long way, and they are putting in practice. And then you've got the Equality Commission there to sort of keep an eye on them. And you've great voluntary activity like, Women in Business led, the Gender Diversity Charter. That's all good. And I'm involved in a group in Dublin called the 30% Club. And that's a global organisation established by Dame Helena Morrissey. And that's to get 30% of women on all boards and C-suites over a period. And companies are committing, and it's like a benchmark and be showcased. And then you've got the big debate, should there just be quotas? But all of that's important. But I actually think there's something more fundamental needs to be done. And I believe in Northern Ireland and in other places, there's still a bias, whether it's conscious or unconscious, across the female life cycle. If it's at school or when you start work or whatever. And there's a big childcare issue, which Roseann has already alluded to. And there's really high expectations of people that are carers or women in general.
Roseann, I was just thinking when Anne was talking there about the 30% Club, about one of the events that I did with you, with Gary Kennedy. And I've found the notes here. I can't believe I'm so organised. Where I had figures from S&P's Global Market Intelligence showing that companies with female CFOs brought in $1.8 trillion more than companies that had male CFOs. Despite those kind of staggering figures, I must say I think we all were completely horrified by what he had to say that day. Yeah. Because the figures in the Republic are dire. Yeah. I don't know how, I mean, he was a nice guy and so on. I don't know how he could sit there and not blush to the roots when he was talking about 16.4% of female directors. It's 2020, for heaven's sake.
We have come a long way, but the figures are dire. And regardless of the fact that the case has been made on numerous occasions and by numerous countries, numerous companies, the evidence is all there that it'll improve your business, your economy, and your society. Yet and all, it doesn't get the attention. It's not coming from the top. There is no real desire. There's a lot of lip service to it. I mean, Gary did tell us that day that the Taoiseach at the time had invited the companies in the South who had all male boards to come to a lunch to have a chat about it. And none of them came. They didn't even respond. So that's the kind of attitude that is still out there. And if you look at ourselves in Northern Ireland, we have 2 women in the top 100 of Ulster Business chief executives, and that's Elaine Burchell and Sarah Venning. And, two. And, it only takes one of those to go or to retire or whatever, and then we're down to 1. And when they first started that, and I first started looking at it, there was 6. So, I mean, we've looked at all of the different barriers, and yes, childcare has to be something that is really looked at, and in looking at other countries and economies and what they're doing and how they're successful there. But I do think it's a responsibility for both the government and for employers. At the end of the day, if women didn't have children, none of us would be sitting here. And they're not valued, and we haven't been valued. And even throughout the whole COVID thing, to me, it was very apparent that women were not being valued. So when it was everybody back to work, back into the offices, the schools weren't back, the childcare facilities weren't back. So they obviously weren't talking to the women who happened to have children about them coming back. So therefore, where is the value that's placed on what women give to the economy? And graduates, and correct me if I'm wrong, Karise, but I understand that 60% of all postgraduates are female, 53% are of undergraduates are female. So, this idea that, women, in terms of having to prove themselves, and like you say, Kirsty, it's all about this imposter syndrome. We are constantly feeling that we have to prove ourselves because we're in an environment that there is unconscious bias in, and we feel we have to prove ourselves all the time. And we really have to keep it high on the agenda and call it out all the time. But I think it has to come. The government need to have a look at this. I think there needs to look at within the programme for government. It needs to be in there. I sit on a number of the apprenticeship strategy, skills strategy, and they all talk, and in their criteria say childcare may be available. Now, childcare may be available means that if you can find a registered creche that will take you on board on a part-time basis, we might pay something. Well, you can't find a part-time creche place. So they're not given childcare. So that there needs to be a real focus place on this, because if we want to build back better, we have to build back diverse. It's essential for the economy and the society. And it really, I think, is important for all of us, all women in leadership positions, to actually keep the pressure on. And one of the things, now the statistics did change down south, and they said it was because there was a government commission, because they had targets, and because there was sustained pressure kept on. So we definitely need to do that. And I personally think that we've tried looking at, role models, and we've done lots of development and mentoring, etc., etc. Quotas need to be taken into the mix as well. That's my personal opinion. And I think we can't wait around, it'll be so many 200 years or something before there's real equality. So you use every tool in your box.
Karise, just listening to Roseann and Kirsty and to Anne there, and maybe to pick up on Anne's point about her daughter and the kind of personal development training that's available, but not at a time that suits her. Also, what Roseann was just saying there about the apprenticeships and childcare is available, but only if you can find it, that kind of thing. We also talked earlier about the flexibility that has had to enter into the way that businesses work during the COVID period. I mean, if we're talking about not letting things go back to the way that they were previously and how that isn't going to happen, is flexibility something, and maybe that recognition of the caring role and so on, is that something that you would have any hope might make things better as we move forward? Development programs, lifelong learning, mentoring and so on are also important to attract and keep women in the workplace. I wonder, is there a glimmer of hope there as a result of the fact that CEOs have had to bunk on their landings with their laptops and do a bit of childcare while they're at it, if they happen to be men?
And I think that as women, I don't necessarily have a problem with, the multitasking, because I reckon, we're all pretty good at that. But I think that's not the point. I mean, the reality has been that there hasn't been those childcare provisions just because of schools and because of nurseries. And I can tell you, hand on heart, this has been the hardest 6 months that I have ever done, because I have had 6 people in the house. I've had a 4-year-old to entertain, and it was still, and my husband has 2 businesses. So it was just that sense of multitasking. Yet I know when we see our undergraduate students and our postgraduate students, there is that larger percentage of women. And I can tell you now, they study at night, they study at the weekends, they do all of that to better themselves and to develop themselves. And yet whenever they go into the workplace, it's almost that is what is expected again, that you have to, I think it's like making a choice of either or. In order to progress in your career, to make the next level, you have to make a choice. And the choice is, either I make that sacrifice on my children and I make those weekends and those residentials, or I want to be with my children so I can't. And I think that's what's wrong. It's the either or that is fundamentally wrong. And I do believe there is a government, there is an intervention required, a serious intervention required, because I can tell you at Ulster University, we're very supportive of women in leadership positions, and we have a number of them with childcare and with children. There's other aspects of diversity that we could do better, but like all organisations, but those structures are in place. But I think if you look at other countries and other governments, if you take New Zealand for an example, a young child, Jacinda Ardern and that young child, and we see that in a number of countries, even in Europe, that always gives me hope to say, actually, you can do both. And I think if I was going to talk to my younger self, that's what I would tell them. You can actually do both. It just means that you have to be very brave and have the conversations and say, no, actually, I'm not going to do that function, or no, I can't do that because of that, but I will do it at another time. So,
and do you think there might be more understanding for that conversation as a result of what's happened over the last 6 months, 9 months, where people who are in leadership roles have had to recognise that life is tough, and it's been maybe as tough for them as it's been for the people working for them. Maybe if I could put that to back to you, Anne, what about that?
I think it was changing already. I know when I talk to employers, people do want more work balance. Even within the chamber team, people, they get a choice whether they go to an event or not. And quite a lot of time they say, no, I'm doing X, Y, and Z with their family. And it's not that they're lazy, it's just that they have a family life. So I think it's changing, but I think it's been accelerated. It has totally and utterly been accelerated. But I do believe young women either have to make a choice between family and delaying the promotion for about 5 years. And so there's a lag, unless there's more flexibility in how they can do their job. So hopefully it'll change, but I wouldn't be 100% convinced yet.
Not holding your breath?
No.
Let me just ask you all to conclude, if we could, because it's been a fascinating conversation. What advice, we've already had a bit of it, but what advice would you offer to the next generation of women leaders? Kirsty, what about you?
What I would say is everyone has that imposter syndrome, so acknowledge that. And, when you get those opportunities, don't let that imposter syndrome take over. Say yes to those opportunities. I think it's really important to build your network. And the final one is pay it forward. If someone helps you out, then you better help someone else out. And that cycle of pay it forward will show up. You'll find somebody that you've helped 5 years from now, maybe on an interview panel. It's just, that's been the 3 kind of keys to success, I think, is really, really important. So take those opportunities and say yes to everything, and do not doubt yourself.
Roseann, what about you?
I think a key thing, and this is something that has come, throughout COVID has been highlighted, is about being yourself. And if you can be comfortable and be yourself and not feel that you have to prove yourself, you have to be loud in a meeting, you have to be different, just be yourself, because that's what brings the diversity. And you're there because you have earned your place, and just, it is really about being authentic and being yourself. And I think you can see that the leadership that have been successful throughout COVID are females who have been authentic, they've been kind, they've been compassionate, all things, and emotional, and all things that would be seen as a weakness. And I think really be yourself too. I talk about the everybody's on the board game, and we're all on the board game, but it's a male board game. And at the moment, women are trying to play that board game, and we need to try and get more women in there so we can change what that looks like, and we have a board game where everybody can play. But I think for young people, it's about being yourself, and also take all the help and support that you can get from anybody. And don't worry about taking help and support, and ask for help and support. And then finally, to never give up. If you want to be that chief executive, there is no reason why you can't be. Just keep going.
And what would your advice be?
Mine is very, very similar. I actually think take every bit of training you can get, but you need to be committed yourself. You need to have ambition yourself and self-confidence. Take any opportunity, even if it's, of course, if you say you're not sure if you can do that, give it a go. And, you can always ask a question quietly. I didn't understand that, explain it. So just be confident. I actually think work for firms that deserve you. And if firms don't have the sort of environment you want, move on to one that has, because, there's a big shortage of skills out there. So we should have more choice these days. And I do think the other bits, support others as you go along, if you can. I was a cynic. I never had a coach in my life, until about 3 years ago. We, Northern Ireland Chamber, put the whole SMT through a leadership program, and we had a 360-degree appraisal, and then you were offered a coach, etc. And I took one begrudgingly, and it was the best thing I ever did, because you have someone that you can talk to that isn't going to judge you. They're not your board, so they're not going to think you've got a load of issues. They're not your staff who think you're weak. And I think get a coach if you can. Not, someone that could just listen, help you come to your own conclusions, and help you, improve your network as well. That's my word. Thank you, Wendy.
Karise, that all sounds like great advice, doesn't it? What would you add to it?
I read a book this year called The Leader Shift, as in shift, not leadership. And the one thing, it was 2 things actually that I would give an advice that actually it's about shifting our mindset. And for me, that has been embracing failure and change. We're hardwired to resist change, and I guess that fear of loss keeps us stuck. So I think, leadership makes us think it's a destination, an arrival point. We will get to that one position, but it's not. It's about leader shifting, and it's a journey. And it's a journey that actually starts with us. And somebody once told me that the biggest ability in leadership is responsibility. And we must take responsibility for how we act and how we behave, and how we actually model that for others.
Great. Well, if we all take all of that advice, hopefully we'll have a lot more terrific women leaders in the future. Thank you all so much for talking to me for this podcast. Karise, Roseann, Kirsty and Anne, thanks for joining me for the podcast on women in leadership. I'm Wendy Austin. This has been the Business of Possibility podcast with Ulster University Business School. Make sure that you subscribe to the series wherever you get your podcasts. Rate us if you can. That would be very much appreciated. And keep an eye on Ulster University Business School's social media channels for updates each week. Thanks for joining us.